My husband left me saying I can't date a waitress, then he applied to my restaurant strategist. Name, Camila. What if the man you loved, the one you trusted with your heart, told you he couldn't be with you just because of your job? Camila never expected her marriage to end with the words, I can't date a waitress. But in that moment, as her husband walked out the door, leaving her with nothing but his cruel rejection, Camila's world was turned upside down. His words struck a chord deep within her. But instead of letting them define her, something inside her stirred an ember of strength she never knew she had. What if, instead of drowning in despair, she could rise from the ashes? Camila had always given everything to her marriage. But now she had to face the truth. She had been defined by someone else's view of her. And it was time to reclaim her identity. Will she let the pain of his departure consume her, or will she find a way to build her own path, no matter what it takes? But when her ex-husband applies to work at her restaurant, one that she built from the ground up, the stakes are higher than ever. Will this be the chance for closure, or will it only reopen old wounds? I never imagined that my marriage would end like this. I had spent years believing that love, trust, and loyalty would hold us together until that moment, when everything came crashing down in the blink of an eye. I can't date a waitress, he said, as if those words were a simple truth. There was no anger, no argument, just a casual dismissal of everything we had built. My heart shattered, but I couldn't even find the words to respond. All I could do was watch him pack his things, methodically folding his shirts as if he had been planning this for a long time. I stood there, in our once shared living room, numb and shaking. How could he say something like that? How could someone I had spent years loving and trusting reduce me to my job? A job I took with pride. A job I worked hard at so that we could live comfortably, so that we could build a future together. But now, I wasn't even worthy of his respect. All because of my job? He didn't even look at me as he said it. His back turned as he picked up the last of his things. The weight of his words was suffocating. I thought we had been partners in this life, that we were on the same team. But I realized, in that moment, that I had been wrong. To him, I was just a waitress. Someone who would never measure up. No matter how much love and effort I gave to our marriage. My hands shook as I tried to hold back tears. I can't date a waitress. That phrase played on a loop in my head. I had worked hard for everything I had, not just for him, but for us. But none of that seemed to matter now. I had spent so much of my life trying to make him proud, to be the wife he wanted. And now, with a few words, he was telling me that who I was, everything I had worked for, wasn't enough. I tried to say something, to beg him to stay, to understand, but the words wouldn't come. He was already gone. He didn't even pause at the door to look back. I can't date a waitress. It wasn't just the rejection that stung. It was the realization that, for all my sacrifice and love, I had never been enough. I wasn't the woman he had wanted, the woman he could admire. And now, I was left to face the aftermath of this cruel abandonment. I stood in the empty room, the silence swallowing me whole. What was I supposed to do now? How could I pick up the pieces of a life that had been shattered in front of me? For so long, I had believed that he was the person I could rely on, but now, I had to face the reality he had made his choice. And it had nothing to do with the love we shared. And that's when it hit me. I had a choice, too. I didn't know how to move forward yet, or what it would look like, but one thing was clear. I couldn't keep letting this define me. I couldn't stay in the shadows of his rejection. I couldn't keep living for someone else's approval. I was more than just a waitress. I had worked hard to get where I was. And I wasn't about to let him or anyone tell me that I wasn't worthy. The question that burned in my mind was this: will I choose to stay silent, or will I take control of my own story? The days that followed were a blur of emptiness. His departure left a hole in the house, one I couldn't ignore. Every corner seemed to whisper of what used to be, of the plans we had made, of the dreams I had clung to. But with each passing day, the sting of his words, I can't date a waitress, remained as fresh as the moment they were spoken. I tried to fill the silence with work, staying late at the restaurant, pretending that the clink of glasses and the hum of conversations could drown out the noise in my head. But no matter how hard I tried to keep busy, the truth lingered. He had walked away. And worse, he had reduced me to my job, a job I had never been ashamed of until now. It wasn't just the cruel comment he had made, it was everything that led up to it. The subtle shifts, the small betrayals that had been building for months, even hidden beneath a veneer of normalcy. I had always been the one who worked late, the one who took care of things when he couldn't be bothered. I had assumed it was just the nature of our busy lives, but looking back, I saw it for what it really was: a slow, steady withdrawal from someone who had once promised to share in all of it. I started to see the moments that I had ignored before, like the time he stopped asking about my day, or the way his eyes glazed over when I tried to talk about the things I loved about the restaurant I had built from the ground up. The vision I had for our future. He had never really seen me. Not for who I was, not for what I had become. He had been so busy with his own life that he had never once taken a step back to appreciate the sacrifices I had made. And I had let him. I had given up pieces of myself, in the hope that, one day, he would see me for everything I was. But he never did, and now, that cruel rejection was the final reminder that I had been invisible to him. To the man I had loved, who had once seen potential in me, I had become nothing more than the waitress at the end of the bar. A job that was somehow beneath him. I realized something in those days after he left. It wasn't just the betrayal of his words. It was the years of emotional neglect I had allowed myself to endure, thinking that one day it would get better. I had been so focused on being the good wife, on making things work, that I hadn't noticed how much I had sacrificed for someone who wasn't really there. He had been emotionally distant for months, but I had pretended everything was fine, because I didn't want to face the truth. It wasn't just him. There were other moments, other betrayals that I had overlooked. I thought about the way my friends had backed away as my marriage deteriorated. I had put on a brave face, pretended that everything was okay, but deep down, I could feel them pulling away. They didn't want to hear about my problems, they didn't want to know about the cracks forming in my life. I had let their indifference slide, too, thinking that it was just part of life. But now I saw it for what it was: another form of abandonment. Then there was the restaurant itself. The very thing that had brought me so much pride now felt like an anchor. I had poured my heart into it, sacrificed everything I had to make it successful, and yet, it never seemed enough. I worked long hours, never stopped moving, always striving for perfection. But it didn't feel like it mattered. Not when the one person who was supposed to be my partner in this journey had turned his back on me. The restaurant was my dream, my achievement, but in the aftermath of everything, it felt like an empty accomplishment. Was it really mine, or had I just created it as a distraction from the cracks in my personal life? As the days turned into weeks, I began to confront the hidden wounds that had been festering for so long, the ones I had ignored, thinking they didn't matter. But now, they were undeniable. The pain wasn't just about him walking away, it was about how I had let myself be defined by someone else's view of me, how I had allowed the small betrayals to pile up until they became too heavy to carry. I had spent so much time trying to please others, to live up to expectations that were never truly mine to meet. I had sacrificed my own happiness, my own sense of self, to fit into a mold that was never meant for me. And now, I was left with nothing but the wreckage of a life I had built on false promises. The question echoed in my mind: can I confront these hidden wounds, or will they remain buried forever? I woke up one morning, the sun shining brightly through the windows, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something different. The heavy weight of the past, the suffocating feeling of being defined by someone else's rejection, didn't feel as crushing. It was still there, lingering in the corners of my mind, but there was something else now, something stirring deep within me. I could feel a unfamiliar but undeniable strength. I wasn't just going to stay stuck in this cycle of pain. I couldn't. I had spent far too many years trying to meet other people's expectations, hoping that one day they would see my worth. But after everything that had happened, I realized I couldn't keep waiting for someone else to change how they saw me. I had to change how I saw myself. The first step was admitting that I wasn't the problem. I wasn't the waitress he had painted me as, and I wasn't the invisible person I had let myself become. The woman who had been rejected and discarded was still in there, somewhere, beneath all the hurt. And she was stronger than I had ever realized. I didn't know exactly where to begin, but I knew I had to take control. No more living in the shadow of someone else's judgment. No more letting other people's opinions dictate who I was and what I could accomplish. That morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let the pain define me. I was going to fight for myself, for the life I had worked so hard to build. The first place I turned to was the restaurant. The place I had put so much of my heart into. It had always been my escape, my passion, but I hadn't realized how much of it had become a symbol of my failures in my eyes. After everything that had happened, it had started to feel like something I needed to escape from. But now, I saw it differently. It was still mine. It was my dream, and I was going to make it even bigger, even better, no matter what anyone else thought. I started by restructuring the restaurant. I had already built a reputation in the community, but I knew it wasn't enough. It was time to make it a place that stood out, a place where I could prove that I was more than just a waitress, more than just someone who had been left behind. I started with the menu, revamping it to showcase not only great food but my vision for what the restaurant could be. I took charge in every area from hiring to the ambience. I wanted this to be my place, not his, not anyone else's. At first, the changes were small new items on the menu. A few changes in the decor, but I could feel the shift. I felt like I was reclaiming my power, one decision at a time. And with each decision, I felt myself grow stronger. I was doing it. I was taking control. But it wasn't just about the restaurant, it was about me. I had spent so long being afraid of what people thought of me, of what my ex-husband had thought of me, that I had forgotten the most important thing of Ali had to be proud of who I was, regardless of anyone else's judgment. I had to believe that I was worthy of the life I had dreamed of, that I could have everything I wanted, even without someone else's validation. The next step was confronting the man who had walked out on me, the man who had belittled me with the words, "I can't date a waitress." The thought of seeing him again made my stomach turn, but I knew that if I was ever going to truly heal, I had to face him. I had to stop letting him live rent-free in my head, stop allowing his rejection to dictate my future. I wasn't sure how this confrontation would go. Would he try to apologize, or would he brush it off, thinking I was just another waitress who couldn't handle the truth? Regardless of what he said, I knew one thing: I wasn't the same person I was when he left. I had changed, and I wasn't going to let him drag me back into the shadow of his judgment. I had a plan now. I was going to show him, show myself, that I was more than the life we had once shared. I was going to take control, not just of the restaurant, but of my future. I wasn't going to hesitate anymore. I wasn't going to shrink back into the corner. I was going to take charge. The decision was clear. Can I find the courage to change my life, or will I hesitate when it matters most? I wasn't going to hesitate. I was going to move forward, no matter what. I had always been the kind of person to avoid confrontation, to take the high road even when it was difficult. But that was before he left. Before he told me, "I can't date a waitress." Now, everything had changed. I could no longer let his words slide. I wasn't going to quietly accept his rejection and move on as if nothing had happened. No, this time, I was going to take control. Not just of my life, but of my power. And the restaurant, one thing I had built from the ground up, was going to be my stage for the ultimate comeback. I had a plan. It wasn't just about proving him wrong. It was about proving to myself that I was more than what he saw me as. That I was more than what anyone saw me as. The first step was making the restaurant my fortress. I had spent years trying to make my marriage work, always sacrificing parts of myself to meet someone else's expectations. I had given too much of myself away. But now, the restaurant would be my sanctuary. I was going to turn it into a symbol of my resilience, a place where I could redefine who I was, where I could stand tall and make a name for myself. I started by evaluating every corner of the business: what worked, what didn't, what needed to be changed. I wanted the restaurant to reflect my true self, not just my past. I started introducing new menu items, rebranding the image, and even investing in staff training. I had big plans. And it wasn't just about making the restaurant more profitable, it was about making it a place where I could walk in every day and feel proud of the work I was doing. But I also needed something more. A statement. A reminder that I wasn't just the woman who had been left behind. I was the woman who had built this. I was the woman who had worked her ass off to create something that mattered. And if he didn't see that, if no one else did, it was time for me to remind them. That's when the idea struck me. I had heard rumors about his struggle with his career after our divorce. He was trying to find something new, trying to make a fresh start, but nothing seemed to stick. And then it hit me: what if he applied to my restaurant? What if he came to work for me? I knew it was a risk. It was dangerous. I could just imagine how uncomfortable it would be to see him again, to interact with him after everything that had happened. But that was exactly why I needed to do it. I needed to see him on my turf, in my world. I needed him to understand that while he had walked out on me, I had built something bigger than I ever thought I could. And I wanted him to see the woman I had become. The woman who didn't need him. I began the process of posting a job listing for a managerial position. I knew exactly what I was doing. I wasn't going to go out of my way to make it obvious, but I also wasn't going to hide it. If he was brave enough to apply, he was welcome to. He had always thought he was better than me, that my work was beneath him. Well, now he had a chance to see just how far I had come. I didn't expect him to apply. I didn't even know if he would want to. But the idea of him walking into my world, the world that I had built, gave me a sense of power I hadn't realized I was missing. It wasn't just about the restaurant, it was about me, taking back control of my own life. It was about making him realize that I was so much more than what he had seen in me. Would he apply? Would he walk in, humbled, ready to work beneath me? Or would he dismiss it as a joke, too proud to even acknowledge the woman I had become? Whatever happened, I wasn't going to let it define me. This was my move, my plan, and I was going to see it through. The tension was building, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had spent too long hiding from my own potential. It was time to show the world and him exactly what I was capable of. I wasn't just a waitress, I was Camila, and I was about to make my mark. The days that followed felt like a waiting game, an exercise in patience that stretched me to my limits. I kept my focus on the restaurant, continuing to implement changes and fine-tune everything, but my mind kept drifting back to one question: would he apply? Every time the phone rang or an email notification popped up, my heart skipped a beat. I wondered if this would be the moment that his name appeared on my list of applicants. Part of me was terrified at the thought of him showing up at my door. What would it be like to face him again? What would it be like to see him walk into my world after he had left me so easily? But I wasn't running from it anymore. I couldn't. I had spent far too long trying to fit into his world, trying to be the woman he wanted me to be. I had swallowed my own dreams, my own sense of self, just to make him feel comfortable. But no more. I was done with that, so I kept the job posting live, knowing that sooner or later, the truth would come knocking. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that I received an application. The subject line read, "Application for manager position, John Harris." My breath caught in my throat. It was him, the man who had walked away from me with nothing more than a few cruel words. Now, here he was, applying for a job at my restaurant. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen for what felt like an eternity. A mix of emotions swirled inside me: anger, satisfaction, fear, but most of all, I felt a sense of empowerment that I hadn't experienced in years. This was it. This was my moment. I clicked open the email, and there it was: his resume, his cover letter, his words. He had applied just like any other candidate. It was surreal, almost laughable. But as I read through his application, something else settled in my gut. He wasn't just trying to get a job. He was trying to prove something. He was trying to win back some piece of his dignity, to walk back into the life he had left behind and reclaim something that had slipped through his fingers. I could see the desperation between the lines of his letter, the hollow promises of growth and change. He was pretending to be humble, but I knew better. I had seen him at his best, at his worst, and now, I saw him at his most vulnerable. The decision was clear. I wasn't going to let him back into my life just because he had decided to apply for a job. No. This was my restaurant, and I was the one in control now. The irony of it all wasn't lost on me. He had dismissed me, insulted me, and then, somehow, found his way into my world. But that was the thing. It wasn't his world anymore. I was the one holding the power now. And I wasn't going to let him walk in here, take a piece of what I had built, and walk out with more than just a paycheck. I deleted his application without a second thought. There was something oddly liberating about it. I didn't need to face him again. I didn't need to show him that I was better than him, because, in the end, I realized something important: I didn't need him to validate my worth. Not anymore. I had built this life from the ground up, I had fought for it, and I wasn't about to let anyone, especially not him, take that away from me. In that moment, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't going to chase after revenge anymore. I wasn't going to make him regret anything. Instead, I was going to keep building, keep working, keep growing until I was the one who didn't have to prove anything to anyone. I had already won.